So good day everyone, I am Alan Filosopo, and today's report will tackle about the annotation of Antonio Morga's Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas. So annotation of Antonio Morga's Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas. First, we'll tackle about the definition of terms. So annotation is a note of explanation or comment added to a text or diagram. Second, successus. Successus is an event, happenings, or occurrences. Las Islas Filipinas. It means the Philippine island. So to summarize the three of the definition of terms, and our topic is the annotation of Antonio Morga's Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas. Is all about the happenings or occurrences in the Philippines. So who is Antonio Morga? Antonio de Morga was born in November 29, 1559 in Seville, Spain. Antonio Morga is a Spanish conquistador and a lawyer and a government official for 43 years in the Philippines. So Antonio Morga's education: studied at and graduated in University of Salamanca in 1574 and also attained a doctorate in canon law. So what is the work of Antonio de Morga? Antonio de Morga taught briefly in Osuna, and a lieutenant governor and a judge in Audiencia. So Antonio Morga and his successors. So he authored the book Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas, or an events in the Philippine Islands, in 1609 after being reassigned to Mexico. So this book narrates observations about the Filipinos and the Philippines from the perspective of the Spaniards. In fact, this book is considered valuable in the sense that it reflects the first formal record of the earliest days of the Philippines as a Spanish colony. Morga's work, which is based partly on documentary research, keen observation, and partly on his personal involvement and knowledge, is said to be the best account of Spanish colonialism in the country. So Rizal was greatly impressed by Morga's work that he himself decided to annotate it and publish a new edition. He meticulously added footnotes on every chapter of the Sucesos that could be a misrepresentation of Filipino cultural practices. Rizal began his work in London and completed it in Paris in 1890. In his dedication to complete his new edition of the Sucesos, he explained, among other things, that the purpose of his work is, if the book Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas succeeds to awaken your consciousness of our past, already effaced from your memory, and to rectify what has been falsified and slandered, then I have not worked in vain, and with this as a basis, however small it may be, we shall be able to study the future. So that was the result. Annotate the work of Morga, the Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas. So Morga's purpose for writing the Sucesos. Morga wanted to chronicle the deeds achieved the Spaniards in the discovery, conquest, and conversion of the Filipinas Islands. Given this claim, Rizal argued that the conversion and conquest were not as widespread as portrayed because the missionaries were only successful in conquering a portion of the population of certain islands. So that was all my report. and I will pass the next reporter to Yuvin Kilario. Thank you, everyone.
Good day everyone, my name is Yuvin A. Kilario. I will report the preface and notable annotation. Preface. Written with Jose Rizal, Europe 1889. As a signature, the following preface was indicated in Rizal's annotation. From annotations to Dr. Antonio Morgan's Sucesos de las Islas Filipinas, as translated in English. To the Filipinos, in Nole Me Tangere, the social cancer, I started to sketch the present state of our native land, but the effect which my effort produced made me realize that, before attempting to unroll before your eyes the order pictures which were to follow, it was necessary first to pause you on the past. So only can you fairly judge the present and estimate how much progress has been made during the 3 centuries of Spanish rule. Like almost of you, I was born and brought up in ignorance of our country's past, and so, without knowledge or authority to speak of what I neither saw nor have studied, I deem it necessary to quote the testimony of an illustrious Spaniard who in the beginning of the new era controlled the destinies of the Philippines and had personal knowledge of our ancient nationality in its last days. It is then the shade of our ancestor civilization, which the author will call before you. If the work serves to awaken in you a consciousness of our past and a blot from your memory, or to rectify what has been falsified or is a calumny, then I shall not have labored in vain. With his preparation, slight though it may be, we can also pass to the study of the future. Notable annotations. The English translation of some of the more important annotations of the successes was done by an early biographer of Rizal, Austin Craig, 1872-1949. The following are excerpts from Rizal annotation to inspire young Filipinos of today. Governor Antonio de Murga was not only the first to write, but also the first to publish a Philippine history. This statement has regard to the concise and concrete form in which our author has treated the matter. Father Chirino's work, printed at Rome in 1604, is rather a chronicle of the missions than a history of the Philippines. Still, it contains a great deal of valuable material on usages and customs. The worthy Jesuit, in the fact, admits that he abandoned writing a political history because Morga had already done so. So one must infer that he had seen the work in manuscript before leaving the islands. By the Christian religion, Dr. Morga appears to me the Roman Catholic, which by fire and sword he would preserve in its purity in the Philippines. Nevertheless, in other lands, notably in Flanders, these means were ineffective to keep the church unchanged or to maintain its supremacy or even to hold in subjects. Great kingdoms were indeed discovered and conquered in the remote and unknown parts of the world by Spanish ships, but to the Spaniards who sailed them we may add Portuguese, Italians, French, Greeks, and even Africans and Polynesians. The expeditions captained by Columbus and Magellan, one a Genoese Italian and the other a Portuguese, as well as those that came after them. Although Spanish fleets still were manned by many nationalities, and in them went Negroes, Moluccans, and even men from the Philippines and the Marianas Islands. 3 centuries ago, it was the custom to write as intolerantly as Morga does, but nowadays it would be called a bit presumptuous. No one has a monopoly of the true God, nor is there any nation or religion that can claim, or any rate prove, that to it has been given the exclusive right to the Creator of all things, or sole knowledge of his real being. The conversions by the Spaniards were not as general as their historians claim. The missionaries only succeeded in converting a part of the people of the Philippines. Still, there are Mahomedans, the Moros in the southern islands, and Negritos, Igorots, and other heathens yet occupy the greater part, theoretically, of the archipelago. Then the islands which Spaniards early held but soon lost are non-Christians Formosa, Borneo, and Moluccas. And if there are Christians in the Carolines, that is due to the Protestants, who neither the Roman Catholics of Morgan's day nor many Catholics in our own day consider Christians. It is not the fact that the Filipinos were unprotected before the coming of the Spaniards. Morga himself says, further on in telling of the pirate raids from the south, the previous to the Spanish domination, the islands had arms and defended themselves. But after the natives were disarmed and pirates pillaged them with impunity, coming at the times when were unprotected by the government, which was the reason for many of the insurrections. The civilization of the pre-Spanish Filipinos in regard to the duties of life for that age was well advanced, as the Morga history shows in its 8th chapter. The island came under Spanish sovereignty and control through compacts, treaties of friendship, and alliances for reciprocity. By virtue of the last arrangement, according to some historians, Magellan lost his life on Mactan, and soldiers of Legazpi fought under the banner of King Topas of Cebu. The term conquest is admissible but for a part of islands and then only in its broadest sense. Cebu, Panay, Luzon, Mindoro, and some others cannot be said to have been conquered. The discovery, conquest, and conversion caused Spanish blood but still more Filipino blood. It will be seen later on his Morga that with Spaniards and on behalf of Spain, there were always more Filipinos fighting than Spaniards. Morga shows that the ancient Filipinos had army and navy with artillery and other implements of warfare. Their prize, creases, and campillans for their magnificent temper are worthy of admiration, and some of them are richly damascened. Their coats of mail and helmets, of which there are specimens in various European museums, attest their great advancement in this industry. Morga's expression that the Spaniards brought war to the gates of the Filipinos is in marked contrast with the word used by subsequent historians whenever recording Spain's possessing herself of a province, that she pacified it, perhaps to make peace, then meant the same as to stir up war. This is veiled allusion to the old Latin saying of Romans, often quoted by Spaniards, that they made a desert, calling it making peace. Magellan's transferring from the service of his own king to employment under the King of Spain, according to historic documents, was because the Portuguese king had refused to grant him the raise in salary which he asked. Magellan was mistaken when he represented to the King of Spain that the Molucca Islands were within the limits assigned by the Pope to the Spaniards. But through this error and the inaccuracy of the nautical instruments of that time, the Philippines did not fall into the hands of the Portuguese. Cebu, which Morga calls the city of the most holy name of Jesus, was at first called the village of San Miguel. The image of the Holy Child of Cebu, which many religious writers believe was brought to Cebu by the angels, was in fact given by the worthy Italian chronicler of the Magellan's expedition, the Chevalier Pigafetta, to the Cebuano Queen. The expedition of Villalobos, intermediate between Magellan's and Legazpi's, gave the name Filipina to one of the southern islands, Tendaya, now perhaps Leyte, and his name later was extended to the whole archipelago. Of the native Manila rulers at the coming of the Spaniards, Raha Soliman was called Raha Mura, or Young King, in distinction from the Old King, Rahang Matanda. Historians have confused these personages. The native fort at the mouth of the Pasig River, which Murga speaks of as equipped with brass lantakas and artillery of the larger caliber, had its ramparts reinforced with thick hardwood posts such as the Tagalogs use for their houses and called harigis or haligi. Murga has evidently confused the Pacific coming of Legazpi with the attack of Goiti and Salcido as to date. According to other historians, it was in 1570 that Manila was burned, and with it a great plant for the manufacturing artillery. Goiti did not take possession of the city but withdrew to Cavite and afterwards to Panay, which makes one suspicious of his alleged victory. As to the day of the date, the Spaniards then, having come following the course of the sun, were some 16 hours later than in Europe. The condition continued till the end of the year 1844, when the 31st of the December was by special arrangement among the authorities dropped from the calendar for that year. Accordingly, Legazpi did not arrive in Manila on the 19th but on the 20th of May, and consequently it was not on the festival of Santa Pontinciana but on San Baudilio's Day. The same mistake was made reference to the other early events, still wrongly commemorated like San Andres Day for the repulse of the Chinese corsair Limahong. Though not mentioned by Morga, the Cebuano aided the Spaniards in their expedition against Manila, for which reason they were long exempted from tribute. The southern islands, the Visayas, were also called the land of painted people, or pintados in Spanish, because the natives had their bodies decorated with the tracings made with fire, somewhat like tattooing. The Spaniards retained the native name for the new capital of the archipelago, a little change, however, for the Tagalogs had called their city Manila. When Morga says that the lands were entrusted, given as encomiades, to those who had pacified them, he means divided up among. The word entrust, like pacify, later came to have a sort of ironical signification. To entrust a province was then as if it were said that it was turned over to Sac, abandoned to the cruelty and covetousness of the encomendero, to judge from the way this gentry misbehaved. Legazpi's grandson, Salcedo, called the Hernando Cortes of the Philippines, was the conqueror's intelligent right arm and the hero of the conquest. His honestly and fine qualities, talent, and personal bravery all won the admiration of the Filipinos. Because of him, they yielded to their enemies, making peace and friendship with the Spaniards. He it was who saved Manila from Limahong. He died at the early age of 27 and is the only encomendero recorded to have left the great part of his possessions to the Indians of his encomendia. Vigan was his encomendia and the Ilocanos there were his heirs. The expedition which followed the Chinese Sir Limahong after his unsuccessful attack upon Manila to Pangasinan province with the Spaniards of whom Morga tells, had in it 1,500 friendly Indians from Cebu, Bohol, Leyte, and Panay, beside the many others serving as laborers and crews of the ships. Former Raha Lakandula of Tondo, with his sons and his kinsmen, went too, with 200 more Visayans, and they were joined by other Filipinos in Pangasinan. If discovery and occupation justify an occasion, the Borneo ought to belong to Spain. The Spanish expedition to replace on its throne Acerila or Malaila, as he is variously called, who had been driven out by his brother, more than 1,500 Filipino bowmen from the provinces of Pangasinan, Cagayan, and the Visayas participated. It is not notable how strictly the earlier Spanish governors were held to account. Some stayed in Manila as prisoners, one governor, Corquera, passing 5 years with Fort Santiago as his prison. In the fruitless expedition against the Portuguese in the island of Ternate, in the Molucca group, which was abandoned because of the prevalence of beriberi among the troops, there went 1,500 Filipino soldiers from the more warlike provinces, principally Cagayans and Pampangans. The pacification of Cagayan was accomplished by taking advantage of the jealousies among its people, particularly the rivalry between two brothers who were chiefs. An early historian asserts that without this fortunate circumstance for the Spaniards, it would have been impossible to subjugate them. Captain Gabriel de Rivera, a Spanish commander who had gained fame in a raid of Borneo and Malacca coast, was the first envoy from the Philippines to take up with the kings of Spain the needs of archipelago. The early conspiracy of Manila and Pampangan former chiefs was revealed to the Spaniards by a Filipina, the wife of a soldier, and many concerned lost their lives. The artillery cast for the new stone for the in Manila says Morga was by the hand of an ancient Filipino. That is, he knew how to cast cannon even before the coming of the Spaniards. Hence, he was distinguished as a fore-ancient. In this difficult art of ironworking, as in so many others, the modern or present-day Filipinos are not so far advanced as were their ancestors. When the English freebooter Cavendish captured the Mexican galleon Santa Ana with 122,000 gold pieces, a great quantity of rich textiles, silks, satins, and damask, musk, perfume, and stores of provisions, he took 150 prisoners. All this because of their brave defense were put ashore with ample supplies except two Japanese lads, 3 Filipinos, a Portuguese, and a skilled Spanish pilot, whom he kept as guide in his further voyaging. From the earliest Spanish days, ships were built in islands, which might be considered evidence of native culture. Nowadays, this industry is reduced to small craft, scows, and coasters. In the time of Governor Gomez Perez das Marinas, Manila was guarded against further damage such as was suffered from Limahong by the construction of massive stone wall around it. This was accomplished without expense to the royal treasury. The same governor in like manner also fortified the point at the entrance to the river where had been the ancient native fort of wood, and he gave it the name Fort Santiago. The earlier cathedral of wood which was burned through carelessness at the time of the funeral of Governor Des Marinas' predecessor, Governor Ronquillo, was made according to the Jesuit historian Chirino, with hardwood pillars around which two men could not reach, and in harmony with his massiveness was all the wood work above and below. It may be surmised from his how hard workers were the Filipinos of that time. A stone house for the bishop was built before starting on the Governor General's residence. This precedence is interesting for those who uphold the civil power. Morga's mention of the scant output of large artillery from the Manila cannon work because of lack of master foundrymen shows that after the death of the Filipino Panday Pera, there were not Spaniards skilled enough to take his place, nor were his sons as expert as he. It is worthy of note that China, Japan, and Cambodia at this time maintained relations with the Philippines. But in our day, it has been more than a century since the natives of the latter two countries have come here. The causes which ended the relationship may be found in the interference by the religious orders with the institutions of those lands.
Hello everyone, my name is Clintelius and this is the continuation of notable annotation importance. So, for Governor Dasmariñas' expedition to conquer Ternate in the Moluccan group, two Jesuits there gave secret information. In his 200 ships, besides 900 Spaniards, there must have been Filipinos, for one chronicler speaks of Indians, as the Spaniards called native of Philippines, who lost their lives and others were made captives when their Chinese rowers mutinied. It was the custom then always to have 1,000 or more native bowmen, and beside the crew were almost Filipinos, for the most part Bisayans. The historian Argeno Sula, in telling of four special galleys for the Marinas expedition, says that they were manned by an expedient which was generally considered rather harsh. It was ordered that there be but enough of the Indians who were slaves of the former Indian chief or principals to form these crews, and the price, that which had been customary in pre-Spanish times, was to be advanced by the Comoderos, who later would be reimbursed from the royal treasurer. Despite of the promised compensation, the measure still seemed severe, since those Filipinos were not correct in calling their dependents slaves. Morga says that the 250 Chinese oarsmen who manned Governor Dasmariñas' swift galley were underpaid and had the special favor of not being chained to their benches. According to him, it was covetousness of the wealth aboard that led them to revolt and kill the governor. But the historian Gaspar de San Agustin states the reason for the revolt was the governor's abusive language and his treating the rowers. Both these authors' allegations may have contributed, but more important was the fact there was no law to compel these Chinamen to row in the galleys. They had come to Manila to engage the commerce or to work in trades or to follow professions. Still, incident contradicts the reputation for enduring everything which they have had. The Filipinos have been much more long-suffering than the Chinese, since in spite of having been obliged to row or on more than one occasion, they never mutinied. It is difficult to excuse the missionaries' disregard disregards of the laws of nation, the usages of honorable politics in their interference in Cambodia, on the ground that it was to spread the faith, religion, and broad field of eating in the Philippines, where more than 9/10 of natives were infidels. That even now there are to found here many tribes and settlement of non-Christians, it takes away much of the prestige of that religious zeal which in the easy life in towns of wealth, liberal and fond of display grows lethargic. Truth in that ancient activity was scarcely of faith alone, because the missionaries had to go in islanders in spices and gold, taught their right hand Mohammedans and Jews in Spain and Africa, Indians by million in the Africas, and more millions of Protestants, schismat, schismatics and schismatics and heretics people, and still people. over 6 events of Europe. All these doubtless would have accepted in a light and true religion if their prayers under pretext of preaching to them and abuse their hospitality, and if behind this name religion had lurked an unnamed domination. In the attempt by Rodriguez de Figueroa and to conquer Mindanao according to his contract with the King of Spain, there was fighting along Rio Grande with the people called the Bohaines. Their general, according Argensola, was celebrated Silonga, later distinguished for many deeds in raids on Visayas and adjacent islands. Carino relates in a anecdote of his colonies under fire once during a truce of a marriage among Mindanao Principalia. Young Spaniards out of bravado fired in his feet but passed on as if conscious of the bullets. Argensola has preserved the name of Filipinos who killed Rodriguez de Figueroa. It was a oval tourist. Previously, he had given a banquet, slaying for it a beef animal of his own, and then made him a traitor to justification for the term of reproach in the parent. The Bohahayin people were in their own country and had neither offended for not declared war upon the Spaniards. They had to defend their homes against a powerful invader with superior force, many of whom were by the reason of their armor, vulnerable. So far rude Indians were concerned. Yet these same Indians were defenseless against the balls from their musket. By the Jesuit line of reasoning, the heroic Spanish peasantry in their war for independence would have been a people even more treacherous. It was not Obal's fault that was not seen as it was a wartime. It would have been the height of folly in view of the immense disparity of arms to have first called out to this preoccupied opponent and then been killed himself. The muskets used by the Bohahayans were probably some that had belonged to Figueroa soldiers who had died in battle. Thought the Philippines had lantakas, and other artillery muskets were unknown till Spaniard came. That the Spaniard used the word discover very carelessness may be seen from Admiral Stern report his discovery of the Solomon Islands. So he noted that the islands had been discovered before. That has always been the first sign of European civilization on its introduction in the Pacific Ocean. God grant that it may not be lost thought to judge by the statistics. The civilized islands are losing their population at terrible rate. Magellan himself inaugurated his arrival in the Marianas Islands by burning more than 40 houses, many small craft, and 7 people because one of his boats had been stolen. Yet to the simple savages, the act had nothing wrong in it, but was done with the same naturalness that civilized people hunt fish and subjugate people that are weak or ill-armed. The Spanish historians of the Philippines never overlook any opportunity by inception or accident that by it twisted into something unfavorable to the Filipinos. They seem to forget that The almost every case that reason for the rup- rupture has been some act of the host or pretending to civilize himself crime crimes committed by the Spaniards, the Portuguese and the Dutch and their colonies had been committed by the islanders. The Japanese were not then suspected the Spanish and Portuguese religious propaganda to have political motives back of the missionary activities. Witness Moluccas where Spanish missionaries served as spies. Cambodia, which was sought that conquer under cloak of converting, and many other nations among the Filipinos, where the sacrament of baptism made of the inhabitants not only subject of the King of Spain but also slave of the Encomenderos, Comenderos, and as well slave of the churches and convents. What would like Japan have been now had its emperors uprooted Catholicism. A missionary record of 1,625 sets forth that the King of Spain had arranged with certain members of Philippines religious order that under guise of the preaching the faith and making Christian that they should lord over the Japanese and oblige them to make themselves of the Spanish party of, and finally it told of a plan whereby the King of Spain should become also King of Japan. And the corroboration of this may be cited in the claims that Japan fell within the Pope's demarcation plans of Spanish expansion, and so there was compliant of mercenaries other than Spanish there. Therefore it was not for a religion that they were converting infidels. The raid by the Dato Sali and Silonga of Mindanao in 1599 with 50 sailing vessels and 3,000 warriors against the capital of Panay is the first act of piracy by the inhabitants of South which is recorded in the Philippine history. I say by the inhabitants of the South because earlier there had been other act of piracy, the earliest being that of Magellan expedition which seized the shipping of friendly island, and even those whom they did not know storing of them heavy ransoms. It will be remembered that this Moroy piracy continued for more than 2 centuries, during which the indomitable sons of the South made captives and carried fire and sword not only in the neighboring islands but into Manila Bay to Malit, Malate, to the very gates of the capital, and once a year merely, but at times repeating their raids 5 and 6 times in a single reason. Yet the governor was unable to repel them or defend people whom it had disarmed and left without protection, estimating persons sold into slavery or killed or sacrificed together with so many other things to prestige of that entitled Spanish sovereignty. Still, in the Spaniards say that the Filipinos of it contributed nothing to Mother Spain, and that is the island which we overthink. It may be so that It may be so, but what about the enormous sum of gold which was taken from the island in the early years of Spanish rules? Of the tributes collected by the Ecomoderos of the $9 million yearly little silver box is filled with prayers and invocation to the saints. Here would seem to be the origin of the anting-anting of the modern Tulisians, which are also of religious character. In Marga times, the Philippines exported silk to Japan, which as now comes the best quality of the merchandise. Marga's views upon the failure of Governor Pedro de Aquinas Aboititos expedition against the Moros unhappily still apply for the same condition yet exist. For fear of uprising and loss of Spain's sovereignty over the islands, the inhabitants were disarmed, leaving them exposed to harassing of a powerful and dreaded enemy. Even now thought the use of steam vessels has put an end to piracy from outside. The same fatal system still is followed. The peaceful country folk are deprived of arms and those made unable to defend themselves against the bandits or Tolisans, which the government cannot restrain. It is an encouragement to bandit banditti to make easy to getting both. Hernando de los Reyes blames the Moluccan Wars of the fact that the first Philippine were a source of expensive pain instead of profitable in spite of the tremendous sacrifice of the Filipinos. There's practically gratuitous labor in building and equipping the galleons, and despite of the, the tribute, tariffs, and other imposed on monopolies. These wars against the Moluccas, which soon were lost forever with the little that had been so laboriously obtained, were a heavy drain upon the Philippines. They depopulated the country and bankrupted the treasury with not slightest compensating benefit. True also that was again to Moluccas so that Spain kept Philippines the desire for the rich Spice Islands being one of the most powerful arguments when because of their expense to him the king through the withdrawing and abandoning them. Among the Filipinos who died the government when the Manila Chinese revolted, Argensola says there were 4,000 Pampangans armed after the way of their land with bows and arrows, short lance, shield, and broad and long daggers. Some Spanish writers say that the Japanese volunteers and the Filipinos showed themselves cruel in the slaughtering the Chinese refugees. This may be very well been so considering the hatred and rancor then exciting, but those in command set the example. The loss of two Mexican galleons in 1603 called for the no comment from the religious chroniclers who were accustomed to see the advantaging on God into them fortunes and accidents of their enemies, yet there as repeated remarks of the vessels that carried from the Philippines world which in commanders had extorted from the Filipinos, using force of making their own laws and not using their opponents, cheating by the weight of measure. The Filipino chiefs are their own explain which is the Spanish expedition against Trinidad the Moluccas in 1605 where Don Guillermo Palaut, Maestro de Campo and Captain Francisco Palaut, Juan Lit, Luis Lont and Agustin Lont. They had with them 400 Tagalogs and Pampangans. The leaders bore themselves verbally for Argenzola writes that in Assault on Ternate, no offer no offer Spaniards or Indian when unscathed. The Cebuanos draw themselves verbally for Argenzola writes that in Assault on Ternate, no offer no offer Spaniards or Indian when unscathed. The Cebuanos draw a pattern on the skin before starting into tattoo. The sign used then was the same procedure that the Japanese today follow. Ancient tradition ascribed the origin of the Malay Filipinos to the islands of Sumatra. These traditions were almost completely lost as well as mythology and the genealogies of which the early historians tell. Thanks to the zeal of the missionaries in the excuse me, in the eradicating all national remembrance as hidden or idolatrous. The study of the ethnology is restoring this somewhat. Somewhat. The chiefs used were the upper garments usually of Indians fine goes according to Colin, of red color, a shade for which they had same foundation the Romans had. The barbarous tribes in Mindanao still have same taste. The easy virtue of the native women that historians note it is not solely solely attributable to the simplicity with which they have obeyed their natural instincts, but much more due to religious beliefs of Father Crane tells. In it was in the journey after death to Kaluwalhatian, the body of the spirit there was a dangerous river to cross that had no bridge other than very narrow strip of woods over which a woman could not pass unless they had husband or lover to extend and to assist her furthermore. The religious animal of the early missions are filled with countless instances where natives maidens chose death rather than sacrifice their just excuse me, to the threats of violence of Commodore Spanish soldiers as the scenario for the rest today of the Philippines has no reason to blush in comparing its womankind with the women of the most chaste nation in the world. Marga remarks that Filipinos like fish better when it's commencing to the turban. Yet another of the Filipinos prejudice which Spaniards like all other nations have in matters of food is initiated with with what he is unaccustomed to or doesn't know is insatiable. The English, for example, find their gourds rising with they say Spaniard snails, while in turns the Spanish find roast beef English style repugnant, repugnant and can understand the relish of other Europeans for beef steak a la tartare, which to them is simply raw meat. The Chinaman who likes the shark meats cannot bear cannot bear Rockefeller cheese, and this example might be infinitely extended. The Filipinos' favorite fish dish is bagoong, and whoever has tried to eat it knows that it is not considered improving tinted. It neither is nor ought to be decayed. Collins says the ancient Filipinos have minstrels who had memorized song telling their genealogies and of the needs of inscribed to their deities. These were enchanted to voyage in cadence with a rowing or a festival or funeral considerable gathering. It is regrettable that these cans have not been preserved as from them it would have been possible to learn how much Filipinos possible of the history of neighboring islands. The canon fondly mentioned by Morga as in the Walid city was probably on the site of the Tagalog one which was destroyed by fire on the first coming of the Spaniards. That established in 1584 was in Lamayan, that is Santa Ana now, and was transferred to the old site in 1590. It continued to work until 1805. According to Gaspar San Agustin, the canon is pre-Spanish Filipinos cast fair, as great as those of Malaga. Spain's foundry, the Filipinos plan was born with all all what was in it save a dozen large cannons and some smaller pieces which the Spanish invaders took back with them to Panay. The rest of their artillery equipment had been thrown by the Manilans. Manilans then Moros into the sea, which is recognized their defeat. Malate, bitter, maalat, was where the Tagalog aristocracy lived after they were dispossessed by the Spaniards of their old homes in what is now the walled city of Manila. Among the Malate residents were the families of Raha Matanda and Raha Soliman, the men and various positions in Manila, and some were employed in government work nearby. They were very courteous and well mannered. Says San Agustin, the women were very expert in list making, so much so they were not at all behind the women of Flanders. The Spaniards says the Marga were accustomed to hold as slaves such native as, native as they both and others that they took into the forest in the conquest or pacification of their the islands. Consequently, in their respect, the pacifiers introduced no moral improvement. We even do not know if in there were Filipinos used to make slave of each other, thought that would would not have been strange for the chroniclers tale of captives' returns to their own people. The practice of the southern pirates almost proves this, although in these piratical wars the Spaniards were the first aggressors and gave them their character. Rizal's agreement of Morgas Statues. The main propositions were emphasized in Rizal's new edition of Morgan's Statues. The people of the Philippines had a culture on their own even before coming with the Spaniard. Filipinos were decommitted, demoralized, exploited, and ruined by the Spanish colonization, and the present state of the Philippines was not necessarily superior to its past. In Rizal's historical essay, he correctly observed that as a colony of Spain, that the Philippines was depopulated, im- impoverished, and retarded, astounded by metaphors with a confidence in her past, still without faith in their present, and without altering hope in the future. Thus, their old tradition, the mementos of their past, they gave up. Their writing their songs, their poems, their laws in order to slave such native as they both and others that they took into the forest in the conquest or pacification of their the islands. Consequently, in their respect, the pacifiers introduced no moral improvement. We even do not know if in there were Filipinos used to make slave of each other, thought that would would not have been strange for the chroniclers tell of captives' returns to their own people. The practice of the southern pirates almost proves this, although in these piratical wars the Spaniards were the first aggressors and gave them their character. Rizal's agreement of Morgas Statues. The main propositions were emphasized in Rizal's new edition of Morgan's Statues. The people of the Philippines had a culture on their own even before coming with the Spaniard. Filipinos were decommitted, demoralized, exploited, and ruined by the Spanish colonization, and the present state of the Philippines was not necessarily superior to its past. In Rizal's historical essay, he correctly observed that as a colony of Spain, that the Philippines was depopulated, im- impoverished, and retarded, astounded by metaphors with a confidence in her past, still without faith in their present, and without altering hope in the future. Thus, their old tradition, the mementos of their past, they gave up. Their writing their songs, their poems, their laws in order to learn other doctrines which they did not understand, another morality, another aesthetics different from those inspired by their climate and their manners of thinking. They dislike degrading themselves in their own eyes. They becomes ashamed of what was their own. They began to admire and praise whatever was foreign and incomprehensible. Their spirit was damaged and it surrendered. Ended of Rizal, the conquest of Spaniards contribute in part of the decline of Philippines' rich tradition and culture. And that's all. Thank you.